Welcome to Pensar Basketball Live. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I didn't want to talk about because every single time we talk about Pascal Siakam, bad things happen. Notice that I've been a little reluctant to offer too much on Pascal Siakam. So today I want to explore where we are with Pascal Siakam, the trade discussion, what's happened over the last few years. And I want to talk about 7 questions that the Toronto Raptors should answer before they approach the table for an extension, and why they need to have very good, positive, and conclusive answers to these questions before they sign the contract, before they offer the contract, before they sign that 5-year deal that he is rumored to want. You should never be scared to tell the truth about a subject, regardless of how controversial, regardless of the pushback, regardless of how many people say terrible things about you for doing it. I want to say this just for the fan base. I don't hate Pascal Siakam. I actually liked Pascal Siakam. I liked him a lot. I consider him one of the best development stories in the NBA. Probably the best development story in the NBA. He's one of them. He's top 5 all-time development stories in the NBA. The type of guy that should go top 5 in most drafts. He didn't because he was late to basketball. During this live, I want to also address implicit biases that I might have, biases that you might have, biases that other general managers might have, biases that pertain to players like Pascal Siakam for a variety of reasons. I want to have a nuanced discussion about this because the last time I made a video about Pascal Siakam and it was only about Siakam, and it was like this extended rant last year, which went on for like 30 minutes, in which I laid out my case for why he wasn't as good as Raptor fans think he is. Well, it really tainted the perception of me everywhere I went. I went to Raptor games looking over my shoulder at people giving me dirty looks. I was worried because people really hated that video. They didn't want to hear it at that time. And I don't think I said it very well. I don't think I was lying. I don't think I said anything that was untrue. I don't think he's ever going to be a top 5 player, top 10 player, whatever. And I think I was generous in that by saying that I think he could be a top 20 player. He hasn't been. Not last year, not the year before, and not this year. He hasn't been that type of player. And if you want to go down the list of 20 players in the NBA that are better than him, it's a pretty easy one to construct. If he was a top 20 player, I think I can guarantee you there would be at least a couple of teams exploring bringing him in as a first option. But that's not how teams see him. Teams see him as a great supporting player. Do the Raptors see him as a great supporting player? Worth noting. I think to start the Pascal Siakam story, you have to go right back to the draft. Why was he overlooked? Again, biases carry. There are players who are overlooked and underlooked for a variety of reasons. Maybe they charm you in the interviews. Maybe they have a particular way about them. Maybe they're very elegant when they move around the basketball court. Maybe they have elite measurables. Maybe they have a game that reminds you of something you've seen succeed before. And it sells you on why this player will be the next Luka, like Cade, or the next great point guard, like Dante Exum, or the next Dwight Howard, like Jalen Duren. Am I just picking on Detroit Pistons prospects? No. But then there are prospects every single year that fall for a variety of reasons. Upperclassmen, international players. Historically, this has been the case. This is the market inefficiency that teams like the San Antonio Spurs have tapped into for years. And I've always thought of the Raptors as a very good team at looking past the obvious, looking past the bias. Looking past the bias about someone's age, their stature, as in with Fred VanVleet, maybe their basketball origin story, like with Pascal Siakam. When Pascal Siakam was drafted, most mock drafts had him in the 40s. The same people who constructed those mock drafts, the same people who passed on him 26 times, are still the same people who are running front offices. That's They knew about him. Is there an anchoring bias to who other front offices think Pascal Siakam is? I'm going to say that that's at least 5 to 10% of any perceptive disrespect that he experiences as a basketball player. At least 5 to 10% is the second rounder who will eventually become a scrub. It's too good to be true. If you look at his career analytics, they're not jumping off the page, to be completely fair with you. He has marginally more win shares in his career than Bismack Biyombo. Does that shock you? It probably should. His career is weird because you weren't expecting it. And typically when you don't expect things, you have a bit of a harder time trusting it. It turned out how you weren't expecting it to turn out. With Pascal Siakam, his draft day story should have been Raptors reach for role player becomes excellent role player, hustle big. But that's not where the Pascal Siakam story ended. He didn't become an elite role player. He became a G League champion. He became a starter in the NBA. He became a guy with a bag, like not a big bag, but a bag. He also became an all-NBA guy. He became an NBA champion. He became a guy who hit a buzzer beater, game winner, whatever, in the game 6 of the NBA Finals. His clutch analytics last year and the year before were not great. His clutch analytics this year, primo, solid. Why is he not talked about in that way? Why do NBA front offices not respect Pascal Siakam enough like they respect a Jason Tatum? Well, certainly, he's not quite on the level of a Jason Tatum, but I feel like with Pascal Siakam, very often the conversation still comes back to what he can't do. It's almost like every single person who overlooked him at the draft is still waiting for him to become the player they thought he would become. I'll say this anchoring bias is a little bit there. I'll tell you what else is there. There is a mistrust of African prospects. Maybe you look at me and say, Rob, you have no business talking about this. Maybe you're right, but it's true. Serge Ibaka, to this day, deals with allegations of changing his age. It is worth noting, however, that this is not necessarily something that follows all African players. It only follows African-born African players. So it's worth saying that this is a mistrust of the notion that many of us grew up with, that a lot of countries in Africa have a lot of corruption, that fudging up documents is not that hard. And all that had to happen was it happened once or twice, and it's been proven that it's happened once or twice for everybody from that continent to be mistrusted. Should it matter that Darko Rajakovic performs poorly or well at his job for the next European coach? Europe's a really big continent, a very diverse continent. What does someone from Spain have to do with Darko Rajakovic born in Čačak, Serbia? What does Čačak, Serbia have to do with Finland? What does Finland have to do with Italy or Croatia or Austria or Germany? These are huge countries with massive populations. Turkey has a population of 87 million people. If you grew up here, you don't understand how big the world is sometimes because of North American education and how it's failed you. But seriously, why does one European coach represent all European coaches other than the concept of otherism and grouping in terms of how we group people? Africa is a huge continent full of billions of people. What the hell does what some guy 25 years ago from Congo have to do with this guy today from Cameroon? What does it have to do with anything other than the way we group things? Darko Rajakovic right now, to every person who grew up, by the way, I heard this today, so I'm just going to repeat it and I don't want to repeat it, but in the 90s, we grew up with a caricature presented on CNN of Serbs as very angry people. And today I saw a tweet that said Serbs be like that. And I guarantee you this person was fed a lot of bullshit. We've worked very hard as a country to destigmatize ourselves, as I think every foreign country, or not foreign country. Wow, that's a silly way to say that. It's like if you're from somewhere else, you're always representing everyone else who's from where you are, because it's almost like if you do something wrong, that's the Serbian guy who did the wrong thing. So does that come into it? When things are too good to be true, does there creep in this idea of mistrusting the Nigerian scammer phone calls? Does that baked in, even if it's not racism, does it come in that be wary, be 10% more cautious with that guy? Just like if you bought the CNN reports about Serbs, if I get angry, there's no exploration of why I got angry. That's just the Serbian guy. They're pissed off people. They're violent. They do this, they do that. When I was younger, I grew up in government housing. When I screwed up in school, there was no exploration of what I was going through. It was just, that's the kid from the troubled building in the troubled neighborhood, and that's how troubled kids act. It's an identification thing. So what I'll say is, at least 15% of how people feel about Pascal Siakam, other than his supporters and diehard fans, has really nothing to do with basketball. Nothing that I mentioned, him going late, being in the second round or whatever, him, coming from not a blue blood. He didn't play at Duke. He wasn't like some massively, it's not his fault that teams didn't see his potential, and Masai Ujiri did. That's a good thing, right? And it's not his fault that some African prospect and even a Chinese prospect at one point, Yi Jianlian, have reportedly misrepresented their age. It's not his fault. Those things came before him. There is an implicit bias against international players in the United States. I know it. I've felt it. I've seen it my whole life. From how North American athletes treat those guys, you don't think there's a bias against Europeans being soft? I had to listen to an entire day, by the way, of TSN and Sportsnet talking about how Darko Rajakovic was a soft dude, and they didn't know that he was tough. You don't know that a guy who climbed from the leagues that he's come from, 16 years old, coaching, grinding, you don't think this guy's tough? You needed him to swear at referees and get angry for you to know that he could hack it as a coach? Him making it to the spot at 44 wasn't enough for you? This is how North Americans, unfortunately, frame European people, European players. Unless, of course, they're Russian. Russia escapes any notion of anything because, their global leader is just such a tough guy. No shade to Russians. I like Russian people. What I'm saying is that this bias has nothing to do with him as a basketball player. But you know what does have something to do with him as a basketball player? Him ascending and getting past all these barriers to garner so much fanfare and support during the championship run, to have people finally push past their biases to become supporters of him, to see him as more than that African prospect that we overlooked in the draft, to get to the point where they could see him as a fantastic basketball player who won an NBA championship and is one of the rising stars in the league. Today we talk about Scotty is the guy who we didn't trade for Kevin Durant. Guess what? Paul George, in all fairness, at the moment the Raptors declined to trade Pascal Siakam for him, was a better player and a younger player than Kevin Durant was last season. I don't remember Pascal Siakam being called the player we didn't trade for Paul George to keep Kawhi Leonard. The way the 2018-2019 season went, just to keep things a buck, regardless of how things ended up for the Clippers. I just want to be clear. Paul George finished top 5 in MVP voting that year, and Kawhi Leonard was deemed the baddest man on the planet and the best player. The Raptors rejected, allegedly, supposedly, pairing 2 of the top 5 players in the NBA because of how much they believed in Pascal Siakam at that moment. Take that moment in time and flash forward to 3 months ago when the Toronto Raptors refused to offer Pascal Siakam a maximum extension. People say foul. People say it's dirty. People say this and that. But everything that I described as a bias against Siakam, which is to say mistrust over his origin story, the continent that he comes from, and where he went in the draft and how people viewed him in the draft, anchoring what they see in him now. These are not biases that should ever impact the Toronto Raptors because they have an African president who saw him and who has always drafted, supported, traded for African players and has spotted Siakam much earlier than the average person. And so he doesn't have as much mistrust. There aren't as many gaps to fill for Masai Ujiri. He's seen him grow, right? For a lot of other people, they basically noticed him in his second or third year as a serious prospect in New Mexico State. Masai has tracked it all the way through as a scout. He's been aware of Siakam. So there's no like, oh, he caught me sleeping and now I'm going to mistrust him for the rest of my life. And there's no, he's from Cameroon and therefore I have a bias against him. So how is it that the organization that has the African president, that drafted him, supported him, held him out of Paul George trades, held him out of a trade that could have potentially tilted the balance of whether or not Kawhi Leonard came back after winning a championship, that they believed this much in this dude, which is as much faith as they've shown in Scotty Barnes today, by the way, if not more. How is it that that dude didn't jump at the idea of signing Pascal Siakam to an extension? What must have happened in the 4 years between those two events to tilt his opinion so much? And how much is his opinion currently tilting what other front offices are seeing? Give this video a like if this makes sense so far. I'd be very curious. I think for a lot of people, accurately saying the bubble tilted their perspective on Pascal Siakam. A lot of people, when I talk about the bubble, the second thing that comes up is Pascal Siakam. When you think Raptors, bubble, Siakam, it's a word association game that nobody wants to play, but it's true. Has no star ever melted down in a playoff series? Sure, it's happened tons of times. Has no star ever underperformed? How bad was he? He wasn't that bad. He wasn't that bad. He actually wasn't that bad. Just an FYI. You remember Pascal Siakam failing the bubble. Go back and actually look at his stats. Go look at his defense. He wasn't that bad. He was bad, but he wasn't that bad. He didn't quit. You know, he tried. He didn't have it. It's not like he soft quit on his team. I mean, LeBron James and Kobe Bryant, two of arguably and understandably the best players of all time, have quit in a playoff series. How are we chastising a guy who during the global pandemic had a really, really rough 2 series, which is a span of what? They swept the Nets or they beat the Nets in 5? I don't know. I remember. We're talking 11 games. 11 games in a sample which includes 700 plus games played as a pro. How is it, or 600 plus games, 500 plus games? He's played a lot of games. How is it that we mistrust this so badly based on one thing? Paradise Lost saying Embiid's always bad in the playoffs. Shadow Warrior saying you landed Scotty because of bubble me. No, that's not true. Tampa was when you landed Scotty Barnes. You landed him after Tampa. Scotty never played in Tampa. You got your years confused. So we're talking 11 games, 4 games against the Nets, in which were a sweep, and Pascal Siakam started every one of those games. Do we judge a player who just didn't show up to the bubble as much as we as much as we chastise Pascal Siakam for failing in the bubble? No. Kyrie Irving still got a max contract after that. He didn't show up in the bubble. He was stirring up controversy and asking people to boycott the NBA. Where's the love of the game for that? James Harden has, I don't like to say this, but James Harden has fully quit on like 3 teams. I mean, there's a lot of mistrust around James Harden and Ben Simmons right now, but these dudes just flat out refuse to play. Pascal Siakam has never done that. So what gives with the mistrust? I can't speak for anybody else, but I can speak for a few people that I've talked to and for myself. And I think if I reflect on my conversations at the time, look back on my emails at the time, look back on some of my Facebook posts at the time, I think the one question that nobody ever fully got over was, how did a person who loves basketball quit basketball for 4 months? And I think that to understand this, you have to understand Pascal, I think, a little bit better. It's the same reason that a guy who lives in a city for 6 years doesn't use public transit for 6 years. He's a very large human being. To anyone who said at the time that he could have just gone to a playground, really? Could he? That's not very safe. Some players would. Scotty would, right? Charles Barkley would. Man of the people. But a guy who's like Pascal Siakam, you have to identify the personality type. Oh, the world is dying. I'm not going outside. You need to really listen to this dude to understand who he is. He got on a streetcar. This is a true story. He got on a streetcar for the first time 2 years after the bubble. It was 2 years ago. And he got off within 1 stop and said that he checked it off his list. That experience was so uncomfortable for him. I don't like to judge people for things about their childhood that I don't understand, but I can certainly understand that certain people have routines, patterns. To those who say that he could have just found a gym here, hell yes, he could have. Don't shut that down. Hell yes, he could have. The lockdown didn't stop anybody from going out to walk their dog or whatever. So it doesn't stop a multimillionaire athlete from putting on a mask, I don't know, like getting into an elevator and getting shuttled over to a basketball court, which he can rent out underground. He had millions of dollars. He could have done that. People always bring up the visa stuff to shut down the discussion, which other people want to have, which is, how does someone who loves basketball not pick up a basketball for 4 months? Seems crazy. In the midst of the NBA the NBA season could start any minute, even ahead of the season. And I guess the other question is, how does a guy fall so out of shape that he becomes a shell of himself? But I think by shutting down the discussion, you refuse to have the discussion. You don't explore the part of, don't people who have most of their extended family in another continent go through something different? I remember at the time feeling a lot of empathy for Marc Gasol, because his entire family, a lot of his family was in Spain, and Spain was going through a massive wave while the team was in the bubble. You saw Marc Gasol's play in the bubble too, right? He wasn't himself. He wasn't as good as he was the year before. He fell off quick. But people attributed that to age. How much of that was actually attributed to the worries that he probably felt for his friends and family back home? I think Pascal Siakam is no different. How much could the worry of my extended family being over there, shouldn't there have been an extra bit of empathy? But because people were so quick to shut down, and because the pile-on of people who attacked him were so racist, we immediately shut down that entire chapter and said, we will not talk about it. Because somebody who, by the way, last year did the same damn thing when he was struggling, last year, or was it the year before? I don't know. He went through an extended period of struggle, and I saw somebody start another GoFundMe or some sort of change.org petition to send him back to. And it's conversations like that that make having a conversation like this impossible, because you never want to dog whistle to people who have that belief. but you also don't want to not have the discussion because the discussion is worth having. I think last year, look, as somebody who called out the Fred VanVleet thing very early, please understand, it's not just me talking to trainers, scouts, and trying to piece together things. I try to piece together things that maybe people aren't listening to. And I'll listen to every single time a player has talked to the media. If Pascal Siakam has talked on a podcast to the media, if Scotty Barnes has talked to a podcast or media, if Grady Dick or any player on the Raptors has talked in public in any language, you better believe I've heard it and I've logged it. People tell you the truth even when they don't want to. There are things about themselves that they reveal constantly. And it's not quack science. It's not pseudoscience. It's science. People say things. They structure ideas. They expose inconsistencies. You know, if someone's story changes drastically in the 2 times they tell it over the span of 6 weeks, it's a very good sign of deception. If someone tells the same story 4 times and they never change the words of that story and it is constructed and rehearsed, that's also a good sign of deception. There's honest behavior, and it's pretty obvious when people are being straight up and honest with you. I think if you're trained and you're experienced in telling what is honest, or what is an honest answer to a question, I think you could probably gauge when someone, I don't know, it's weird. Like, being dishonest is very uncomfortable for the speaker, but it's also extremely unsettling for the listener. You just have to learn to tune into that. And I think that over the years, as Pascal Siakam has talked on podcasts and talked to the media and answered, some of these insane, dumb questions by the media that exist in Toronto, I think you've gotten a really good insight into who he is. I don't know Pascal Siakam, so I can just gauge what the concern is at this point. So let me ask now the 7 questions. Well, let me set this up first. 2 summers ago, the Toronto Raptors approached Pascal Siakam with an extension offer. They also approached Fred VanVleet with an extension offer. There have been rumors that Siakam was not offered a full 4 years. I will reject these rumors. I think he was. And there'd be absolutely no reason for him not to. The only question I have is, was he offered the 5th year at that time? And I would not be surprised if he was. The Raptors were coming off a beautiful season in which, despite having an injured Fred VanVleet, they were trending up. They had the Rookie of the Year in Scotty Barnes. Pascal Siakam had redeemed himself in terms of, playoff performances. He had proven to at least the front office and to himself that he could perform in the playoffs, that the bubble is in the past, and he had his best playoff series. In my opinion, he had his best playoff series as a number 1 guy. He proved that he could be the leading scorer on a good team. And, from the Raptors side, they thought, hey, if Fred's healthy, if Pascal is, this guy going forward and Scotty gets a little bit better next year, we could be really, really good. I think when people show you who they are, believe them, Maya Angelou quote. But also, I think it's good to read how front offices tend to deal with information too. Is there a type of prospect that they keep favoring over another type of prospect? That might be useful. Is there a predictable pattern in how they gauge the success and failure of their teams? So, for instance, was going 7 games under 500 some magic number that cued the OG Anunoby trade? Well, it's the same number that cued the Rudy Gay trade. This is a pattern of how people think about numbers, right? So with Pascal Siakam, I think it would be crazy to assume that he wasn't offered an extension because, and I'll tell you why, because that year itself and the next year, the Raptors acted exactly consistently with who they are, which is a team that has always tried to show players faith. They wanted to show Kyle faith. They wanted to show Serge faith. They wanted to show DeMar Carroll faith. They've always tried to overpay their guys. They've always tried to do that. The only times where they have walked off of a contract or walked back off of a contract or maybe not made an offer that was super generous. Consider all of Kyle's, contracts through the years. They never tried to lowball him. Do you know that Kyle Lowry almost left to take less money to play in San Antonio? Like, I mean, come on. His market value, there wasn't another team in the league that was willing to offer him 30. Did we lowball him because of that? Nope. Took care of him. At this point, I believe it's worth noting that it would be really hard for me to believe and very hard for someone else to prove to me or to anyone that Pascal Siakam was not offered an extension. However, because he had made All-NBA twice and he had a realistic expectation that if the team continued to be successful, that he could make All-NBA again, he decided, hey, let me bet on myself. Why am I saying bet on yourself? Am I trying to cue you up for some sort of duplicitous cross comparison between he and Freddie? No, those are his words, actually. He said, I'm going to bet on myself like my man Freddie. He literally said it. Go back and find the interview. I promise you he said it. I think the proximity between him and Fred cannot be understated. These two were co-captains of the team last year. And believe me, if he found what Fred VanVleet was doing particularly egregious, specifically the stat padding, then videos from that Charlotte game saying my bad when he missed a layup in the midst of a blowout, by the way, would never have made the rounds. They would have never been on because they would have never happened. This is a guy who helped his co-captain specifically in certain games hijack the offense in order to pad his stats, in order to get a better contract. The concept of get the bag and this culture of when things go bad, I just look out for myself comes from Nick Nurse, in my opinion. Why do I say this? Because I have listened to Nick Nurse talk on the record hundreds of times about how he motivates players. He motivates them by dangling green bags of money. If you make this sacrifice, you can make All NBA. If you make this sacrifice, you can get a bigger contract. You make this sacrifice. He's not really talking about team success because Nick Nurse is motivating people by what he's motivated by. Money. If you make this sacrifice, you can be a starter next year. Let's build you up to that. How do you get someone to buy in is so important. Do you, consider this. If you're a parent out there, how do you get your kids to eat vegetables? I want to know. Do you give them sermons about the value of, eating vegetables? Do you bribe them? Do you say, if you eat the vegetables, if you're like most parents, you probably bribe your kids. Or are you totally toxic and you threaten your kids? If you don't eat your vegetables, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. If you're that type of parent, fuck off. But seriously, most parents bribe their kids to do things that they don't want to do. And I think a lot of coaches also bribe their but not with, funny bribes. Like, I'll take you all to dinner and you can rack up the bill and haha, we can all have an expense at the young first-time coach who has to pay this, enormous bill. Everyone talks about Darko, pizza party. It's not a pizza party. Relax. He's going to take them to a really nice restaurant and they're going to have a little bit of fun on his expense. They do this to rookies as well, by the way. That's where he got it from. That there was a hazing ritual once with a rookie that I will not name, where his teammates brought him to they made some sort of deal with him that if he couldn't make this number of threes, that he had to buy the team dinner. And he just agreed to it, and he missed. And this was, I think, the Raptors. I don't want to clue it too much. So it was between 2006 and 2010. That's a pretty wide range. And that player had to basically buy dinner for his team, and he thought that he was going to have to pay a couple $1,000s. They racked up the bill to, I think, 18 grand on that dinner. So this is the tradition that Darko is insisting on paying. So now, combined with his $25,000 fine, plus the potentially 18,000. This could be like an $80,000 bill. So anyways, Darko is going to pay a pretty penny. That point aside, I digress. Perfect. So how you motivate people. And I believe that Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, all of these players came into a culture where the head coach was motivating by dangling the carrot of money and opportunity and greener pastures when it came to being able to take care of their family. And when you bring that dangling of carrot, which goes away from building good team habits, becoming the best basketball player, letting the money take care of itself. And rather, the money becomes the objective within your locker room, which it wasn't with Kyle and DeMar, just to be clear. Like, those guys didn't make it about that. They made it about winning. They made it about, let's beat this team in the playoffs. It wasn't until really those guys left that you left a vacuum to be reinterpreted. And I think that it was really Nick Nurse. I believe it was Nick Nurse. From everything I've heard from Nick Nurse and everything I've heard about Nick Nurse, that seems to be how he motivates people. Even right now, how do you motivate Joel Embiid to completely change his play style? You poke. You say, oh, they say Nikola Jokic is still a better player. Let me turn you into a player who can do all the stuff that Jokic can. Do you want to become more of an elbow extended passer? You want to become more of a playmaker? See, this is how you motivate people. But it's nothing to do with team success. You're not motivating Joel Embiid by team success. You're actually taking what is the ugliest part of our personalities, which is a need of individual glory, and magnifying it to the level of trying to confine it within a team context. So you assume that if you can motivate Pascal with the concept of we can make you all NBA, right? Like, consider how Darko motivates people. I'm not trying to do a Darko and Nurse cross comparison here, but in a weird way, it's going to extend into one. Consider how he motivates a player like Scotty Barnes. Do you think he's going up to Scotty Barnes and saying every single day, if you do this, you'll get a supermax? Do you think that conversation has ever been broached between these two people? Think about it, because I guarantee you that if Nick Nurse was in Nick Nurse was in Darko's situation right now, then he would be trying to gently nudge and push Scotty Barnes into taking more shots to become an all-star. Do you want to become an all-star? And this is the problem. When you consider how Scotty addresses Nurse or their relationship, you pretty much very conclusively come to terms with the fact that they don't see the game of basketball the same way. He's not one of those people that can be motivated by an all-star selection or all-NBA. He is in the midst of campaigning for all-star. His shot attempts last night should tell you he doesn't care. He's never cared about that stuff. Noting, all of these things are worth noting, piecing together. So where are the Raptors with Pascal Siakam? I think they are on the cusp of a divorce. And I think last year played a huge part into it, but I think it's been coming for a while. I think last year they noticed their team culture. I think they had a real wake-up call last year. I think they really, really saw themselves. I think they had an existential crisis, if I'm being honest. And I always hope that it's some part of what this channel did to do the lowlights and expose and change the conversation around this team last year, as completely ridiculous as it may seem to some people who are coming into this late, thinking, how could a channel with, at the time, 4,000 or 5,000 followers or 4,000, 5,000 subscribers have done anything to swing the narrative on a multi-billion-dollar organization and how it's being run? I would like to think that we did. I would like to think that when I would go on Twitter or Reddit or RealGM and listen to the talking points around the team, that I knew that we were the channel that brought those talking points up. And the conversation around Pascal Siakam not being a playoff number one, this was not a topic that was explored very deeply before we brought it up. I promise you, check the receipts. The internet is free. Go check everyone talking about Pascal Siakam last October. Go listen to our video last year. Go listen to every, Raptors Republic, Raptors Digest, whatever. Go listen to all of those guys, NBA Chef. Go listen to all of them. See what they were saying. Look at our talking points. See where we are a year later. It's not necessarily me patting myself on the back. It's me trying to say that, yeah, you know what? Screw it. It is me patting myself on the back. I'm actually very, very happy to be early on things. And it takes guts, because it also takes a lot of whips. You get a lot of punches to the face when you're early on things. When you try to go against what other people are saying, you don't get, like, when you just go with what other people think, no one criticizes you because your opinion doesn't stand out. When every single person or every content creator in the city is talking about him being an MVP candidate and you're saying he's not a top 20 player, he never will be, I think, or he's never going to be a top 10 player ever, but he's not a top 20 player right now, and these are all the things that are wrong with him, you stick out. Do you ever wonder why the smallest dog doesn't gets picked on? Do you ever wonder why the black sheep, why that concept even came up? Because nobody wants to stand apart. Nobody wants to stand apart. In an age where content is judged by views and controversy, nobody wants to be standing out for the wrong reasons, only the right reasons. So the video saying that I am an idiot, or I am stupid, or I am this, or I am that will get tons. You can tell I'm not completely over the vitriolic response to that video last year. It still stirs up a little bit of anger. But I want to say that at the time, last year, things were going well for the Raptors. And I believe had it been possible at the time to sign an extension with Pascal Siakam, that the Raptors would have agreed. I believe, despite the fact that Fred VanVleet denied that he was offered an extension, and then later in a podcast confirmed that he was, so just capping and lying. The rumor broke that he was offered in the midst of a cold streak, by the way, in the midst of a terrible cold streak where he was shooting abysmal numbers. Fred VanVleet let it leak. Trust me, it wasn't the Raptors, because what advantage would it be for them to leak that now? Fred VanVleet himself leaked, I believe, let me not get sued here. I believe that someone close to Fred VanVleet leaked the story that he was offered 4 years, 104, in order to stabilize his market value. And then he came out and denied the rumor that he rejected 4 years, 104. I can't say that was never happened. And then later said that he had rejected that exact contract. Why would you offer Fred VanVleet an extension, the guy who didn't even make it through the playoffs, and not offer the best player on the team that extension? Of course you would. If you're signing Fred, there's no point in losing Pascal. These are a tandem. So naturally, if ever anyone tries to deny this concept that the Raptors offered Pascal Siakam the maximum contract at that time, they'd be crazy. Of course they did. Of course they did. They wanted to secure him. But something happened between last year and this year to change their thinking. Because allegedly the rumors and the reports came out this year that the Raptors haven't offered him an extension. There was, of course, the disastrous media day in which, Masai Ujiri, in addressing Siakam, also in tandem addressed selfishness, which some people accurately, inaccurately, maybe, prematurely assumed was him calling out Siakam for being selfish, in which case, naturally, a lot of people were very disturbed. His fans especially. How could you call a player like this selfish? He's a champion. He's a 2-time All-NBA. He's a this, he's a that. Look at how good he is. But one thing is for sure. If the Raptors offered Siakam an extension, the reporting that we've heard is that he would sign it. So why haven't they? Here are the 7 questions. Sorry for taking 48 minutes to get there. The first question I would ask is, does he really want to be here? The reporting is all, he won't sign anywhere else. He won't sign an extension with anyone else. But is that true? Number one, I don't think it's true. And I hope the Raptors know it's not true. Okay? It's not about him wanting to be here or wanting to be anywhere else. It's about approaching free agency with the maximum amount of leverage. Why did Fred VanVleet, in the midst of an entire fan base turning on him, not demand a trade to his target destination last year? Why? Because in order to approach free agency with the absolute maximum value, you have to have the maximum negotiation power, which means the maximum counter offers, the maximum interest. The Toronto Raptors, if they trade Pascal Siakam, can no longer be a suitor for Pascal Siakam. Do you understand basic math? Let me put it this way. The Toronto Raptors are in a very, very sticky situation where they cannot afford to lose Pascal Siakam for nothing, regardless of whether they think he's worth a max, 5-year max, 4-year max. If he approaches free agency with this team, he knows deep down that they can't afford to lose him, which means that at the very least, he will have one offer on the table that is guaranteed to be used as leverage against all other offers. Think about what I just said. Think about it. Like, really freaking think about it. This team can offer him 5 years of generational changing, life changing, family changing money. Right? So you have to ask yourself, does he really want to be here? Or is this one of the teams that if they traded him would now be off the table for his services? Raptors Nation, any team can offer him 5 years with his bird rights via trade. Correct. And we will get to that. But worth noting, as it currently stands, the current market for Pascal Siakam is as follows. The Toronto Raptors plus every single team that wants him. The minute the Raptors were to trade him, one less team would be at the negotiation table. Does that make sense? Because the team that would trade serious assets for him right now could still be engaged in talks in the offseason for a sign and trade. Does that make sense? Like, if the Raptors really don't want to keep him, they could still sign him to the 5 year and then trade him to that team, which means that he still secures the 5 years. But if he goes to another team and they could offer him the 5 years, but let's say they renege and they say, we want to offer you 3 years because you didn't have a great second half of the season, our playoffs did not go well, you won't have the Raptors on the other side of it to be able to say, here's your 5 years. Think about it. Right? So you have to ask yourself, does he actually want to be here? And why would he want to be here? His fan base has turned on him several times. Half the fan base wants him gone. The front office does not want to extend him an offer. Why would he want to be here? The team is not winning. The team is significantly under 500. This is exactly when most stars who care about winning demand a trade or privately ask out. You have a future MVP, type of, prospect, or let's say maybe that's very premature, face of the league. Darko Rakovic is getting to me too. At least a future all-star at the very least, and the future face of the franchise in Scotty Barnes, who plays roughly the same position and is on a completely different timeline. Fred mentioned it. I saw where things were going in Toronto, end quote, 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 end quote. So how does Pascal Siakam not see it? Well, when we talked to Jake Fisher on the Twitter Spaces, he said, all I'm hearing is that he just wants to get paid. Raptors are good for business because the Raptors are the one team that absolutely cannot afford to lose him, which means they are the one team that will absolutely be leveraged against in a contract negotiation. I'll bet my life on this. If his agent knows what he's doing, he would guide him to stay with the Raptors. If I was his agent and I wasn't a Raptor fan, I would guide him to stay with the Raptors because this is a secure organization that does not do their players dirty at all. Even after everything that happened with Fred VanVleet, they were still the largest counter offer for Fred VanVleet's services. And he used that to get the maximum offer from Houston. This is good business. This is not me shaming anyone for getting the biggest contract, but please understand, this is how it works. Number 2, how does Pascal Siakam fit with Scotty, IQ, RJ, and Darko's offense? Honestly, really well. I think this is my answer as a if I was Masai Ujiri. He's a transition offensive guy. He's having one of his best half-court efficiency seasons. He's clearly bought into some of the offensive principles because he's moving more without the basketball. He's shooting the ball a lot better. I would be absolutely, and he's got the switchability with OG and Precious out. He might be one of the last remaining 6'9", Vision 6'9" remnants. Why would I trade him? Of course, basketball-wise, he fits. Surely he fits. Like, from a purely theoretical standpoint, you'd be very lucky to get a player back who becomes half the player Pascal Siakam has become, or is, and currently is, and may be for the next 4 years. So why would you take away Scotty's best teammate right now if your goal is to win? You don't have draft picks. What are you doing? So in terms of does he fit? Sure. Does he fit as well as certain other players could? Maybe not. Is he a top 50 fit? Like if I take that starting lineup and I say, okay, give me one player and I could pick any player in the league, where would he go in that draft? Right? I could pick any player, which means I could pick Luka, LeBron, AD, whatever. Where does he go in the list of guys I want as the fifth starter with that unit? I think maybe not top 50. So it's worth noting that despite the fact that he fits well enough, he may not be the optimal fit. So I'll weigh this as a front office. Number 3. Let me just add this to the 1. Does he actually want to be here? And his business motivations. This is a big watershed moment. You know, we're watching Scotty Barnes right now deal with the fallout of losing OG to the point where he's bringing up OG in post-game pressers like 10 days after OG was traded, saying, you know, we had this type of guy. He used to be my teammate. That was a little tongue-in-cheek from Scotty Barnes, but you can tell that players do get close. And for Pascal Siakam, his welcome to the NBA moment was DeMar DeRozan getting traded for Kawhi Leonard. You know what's interesting? Actually, I'll address that with point number 7. But watching this front office, quote unquote, do DeMar dirty, and naturally, you know, DeMar says, I text Pascal every day. I text those guys, Freddie, every single day. He's still in touch with those guys. This guy hates your president. He didn't talk to him for years. Even 2 years after that ordeal, someone said, would you talk to him today? He said, nothing to talk about. Do you understand that this guy, DeMar DeRozan, was in your franchise player's ear every single day? How is it possible? Ask yourself the very human question. If one of your best friends, like let's say you work at a company, right? Like, be honest. You work at a company. You have a best friend or a mentor who mentored you into that company, and your boss fired them without cause, no notice, and withheld their pay. Just kicked them out of the office, yelled at them, screamed at them, told them to fuck off, kicked them out of the office. They went home. They're texting you. You meet up with them for a beer. You ask what happened. They say, this boss did this to me. How quickly would you quit that company? How quickly would you start looking other places? You would never trust that boss, ever. No matter how well things ever went, you would never trust this dude. And this is the Raptors' blind spot, that every single person who was close to DeMar immediately became 10 to 20% less trusting of Masai, and it never changed. Never changed. Not with Kyle. Nope. Not with Kyle, not with DeMar, not with Serge. Not maybe with Serge, maybe with Danny, because they understood the business. But in that moment, loyal, nice guy who supports players he drafts persona went off. Cutthroat business guy who will do what is necessary to win the championship came on. And while it is perfectly ethical what he did, it was not forgotten because of the reputation that he'd built up and because of how hard DeMar took it and his personal response to it and his extended toxic media interviews about it. I know DeMar went through some stuff. I have a lot of empathy for him, but I don't think he went about dealing with this the right way. Basically tarnished Masai Ujiri's reputation, a guy who had shown him endless faith. It wasn't right. And Masai Ujiri never slung mud back. They never talked about the things DeMar didn't do when he was here. You never heard a rumor. DeMar was one of my favorite players, but I can tell you, when that fiasco ended, the only person who I lost respect for was DeMar. The only person I lost respect for in that whole situation was DeMar, not Masai Ujiri. Okay. Number 3. What are Pascal Siakam's long-term goals and motivations? I need to know this. If I'm extending this guy 5 years through his 30s, I need to know what are his long-term goals and motivations. And as it comes to long-term goals and motivations, I think I need to let the behavior dictate. If your long-term goal and motivation is to win a championship, then I need to know why you, as a 30-year-old in his prime, fast approaching his decline, regardless of how go-go gadget superhuman person you think Pascal Siakam is, regardless of what you think the effects of starting basketball late are, there's no chance in hell he's a better player at 32 than he is today. Let me amend that. There's no chance in hell that he's a better player at 33 than he is today. There's almost like a 99% certainty that he will be a worse player at 33. He's not worth a max right now. He's not, in my opinion. But this is just me thinking about this a little bit. This isn't always how contracts are negotiated, by the way. There's a lot of reasons why guys get paid a little bit more than they're actually worth. But I want to say, in terms of on-court impact, if I look at the win shares, boxes minus, value of replacement, team success, anything, eye test, whatever you gauge basketball by, I don't see a max player when I look at Pascal Siakam right now. I see a fringe 35 million guy, which is a hair above what I see guys who are fringe 30 million guys. And maybe I could sell myself on a max contract, but I need to know what his long-term goals and motivations are. If your goal is winning a championship, then I need to know why you want to be here, right? Kind of goes back to the first one. If your goal is, team success and building this culture, then I want to understand, I want to understand completely how you allowed things to go so bad under your watch last year. When we've elevated you to leader, we have not been successful. I need to know how you feel about that. And I cannot suffer through another, that's not my job response. A go-to response, by the way, that Pascal Siakam has gone to very many times. If your goal is winning all NBA, then I need to understand how you're coming out this season playing the way you are. If your goal is championships, or is your goal not championships? Should I pay a lot of attention to your goal being different than the things that I want this team to be about? For instance, when asked on Serge Ibaka's show, how hungry are you? What his response was when he found out that Kawhi Leonard was leaving, I need you to ask yourself, if you were the second best player, allegedly, the second leading scorer on a championship team and had just won a championship and your goal was winning, how would you respond to the best player in the world choosing not to sign with you? How would you interpret that information? I think if I'm speaking for myself, I don't know about you, I would be very upset. I would be very upset. I would be heartbroken. I would be broken. I would be shattered. I mean, eventually I would get up from it. Yeah. And I would try to do my best, but I'd be very sad. Just like Vince was really sad when Tracy McGrady left. Just like Kevin Durant was very pissed when James Harden left. Just like Joel Embiid, who probably, cares a lot about individual shit as well. Any player would be upset that their best teammate left, especially when their best teammate just carried them to a championship. But do you know what Pascal Siakam's response was? He rubbed his hands together and said, "More shots for me." Fred VanVleet said something very similar. He said, well, I don't want to misquote Fred VanVleet, and he's not on this team, but he said something to the effect of more money for us. Basically, that this championship was going to have, this championship had presented this team that had won the championship with good grace equity, right? And eventually someone was going to get paid for it, and everyone got paid for it. Nurse negotiated his contract. Masai Ujiri got a massive deal with, all sorts of perks that he would have never gotten if not for a championship. Nick Nurse got an extended leash, with the fan base. I think a lot of players got an extended leash with the fan base. I think Pascal Siakam was able to survive that bubble meltdown and his admission that he had not touched a basketball in 4 months, which caught everyone very much by surprise, by the way, when he said it, because of the championship. Right? But what are your long-term goals and motivations if your response to Kawhi Leonard is signing with the Clippers was more shots for me? I think your long-term goal is more shots for you. No? What are, all we heard was Fred VanVleet's a winner. Fred VanVleet this, Fred VanVleet's that, right? Fred VanVleet opted to go to Houston because they paid him the most money. The fact that they're winning is incidental. Do you think he could have gone to a team that was much closer to contending? But they couldn't offer him and wouldn't offer him $43 million. How much do you think Philly would have offered Fred VanVleet right now to be a backcourt mate? Oh, they wouldn't have started him. But they could have made it work. They had Nick Nurse there. They could have started an undersized backcourt. He could have played with a real MVP candidate in Joel Embiid. He could have gone to the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm sure he could have gone to the Milwaukee Bucks. He could have gone to a team that was a lot better than the Orlando Magic. The Houston Rockets. But he bet on himself again. And he took the maximum amount of money. And I'll guarantee you that if some team in frigging the Middle East or in Dubai had offered him $150 million to come play for them, he'd be playing there right now. Some people are bought by money. No shade. No shade on those people. I grew up with not very much money. But I will say for sure that there is a reason to believe that his long-term goals and motivations are very stemmed in money. Number 4, how do the other 29 teams actually feel about him? If I'm signing this guy to a 5-year deal, I need to know who likes him, who really likes him, which front office, which general manager out there has been very anxious to bring him into the program, might just be waiting for the right opportunity, might just be waiting for an asset to pop, might just be waiting for some draft luck. I think the Raptors got a really good gauge on who felt what about OG Anunoby. I think they got a really good idea that, hey, Dallas really likes OG. New York really likes OG. This is what they were willing to offer for him, et cetera, et cetera. Philly really likes OG. The thinking and the intel and the data that you gauge from 3 years of trade discussions for Pascal Siakam with Atlanta, with Indiana, with New York, with all sorts of teams is invaluable, because every time somebody presents you an offer, you get not only intel on how they feel about their own players, but how they feel about your players. Bobby Webster has talked about this extensively. And I suggest that maybe after dangling this guy for 3 years, I'm starting to understand that maybe the other 29 teams don't feel as bullish on him as I've felt for the last few years. Number 5, how will his game age? I think that players who age well typically have a couple of characteristics. I don't think Pascal Siakam has most of those characteristics. One that he does have is that he has had a solid track record of being in shape, and that it's not quite the Oliver Miller, Sean Kemp situation. I also think another thing that bodes well for him, touch wood, is that he has not exhibited the sign of having off-court demons, specifically gambling addictions, strip clubs, OF thoughts, etc. The types of things that can ruin anyone, really. So I think the fact that he keeps his nose clean, and the fact that he works really hard, and that he's had a very professional approach to his body for most, if not all, of his career, and that he has, touch wood again, not been overly injury prone, should be a very good thing for plus aging well. What would not be a great track record for aging well is he's a fast twitch athlete approaching age 30. He has been on a slow decline the last couple of years, and if you try to extend that chart forward, it extends very poorly for him. He is not an overly large player physically. Like typically, 7-footer will age a little bit better than a guy who's 6'9", who will age better than a guy who's 6 feet. It's not a hard and fast rule, but typically the bigger you are, the better you age, unless of course you are chronically injured. Case in point, Arvydas Sabonis with with no kneecaps or no ACLs or whatever he had, was able to come in and be one of the top 25 to 30 players, even well past his prime in his late 30s for the Portland Trailblazers. He's huge. He's 7'2". So I just want to say that players who shoot well are not necessarily overly reliant on athleticism, and players who think the game more than feel the game are not instinctually bursty athletes, are more like students of the game, thinkers of the game, like obsessed with the game, like DeMar DeRozan types I think those are the guys who age really well. Maybe even guys who didn't play very much, guys who have low miles. That's another thing I'll tack on for goods for Pascal Siakam. So there's 3 things that tack well for he will age well. Number 1, low miles. Number 2, let's say 4. There are 4 things for and a bunch of things against, and we'll talk about the against part at the end. But the 4 things for are started basketball late. Number 1, low miles. So he didn't play like a huge number of minutes through most of his career because he played a lot of his career out during years that he would have otherwise been in the NBA. He was either A, not playing basketball, and B, in college where they don't play 82 games a year. So effectively, when you look at his games played, they are lower than almost any other player who's really good that's his age, right? So that makes sense. So that means that Jason Tatum, by the time he gets to Pascal Siakam's age, with the combination of playoffs, deep runs, etc., will have probably played twice as many games as Pascal Siakam. Not all 30-year-olds are equal. And when you take into consideration the fact that he really takes care of his body, and the fact that he has low miles, and the fact that he keeps his nose clean, and that he takes care of his body, and he's been relatively not injury prone, I think those are all very good feathers in your cap that he will continue to be a really good player. However, the lack of shooting, consistent shooting success, and combined with the lack of post game necessarily, like, I mean, he has a post game, but his game is not built on size and strength, but rather quickness and agility, that he really could be a player who's one serious injury away from a fall off that you can't repair. Also, once again, the decline in his analytics and stats over the last couple of years, there is not like some upward trajectory that some people think there is. There just hasn't been. It just doesn't exist. It's not real, right? Okay. Going on to question number 6. What's available for him? I don't even understand this question. I wrote it down and now I'm struggling to understand what's available for him. Yes. Okay, now I understand it. I phrased that weird. As in, before I sign him to an extension, I need to know what I could get in a trade. So I need to weigh out the pros and cons of actually bringing him back versus not bringing him back. And I'll do that in part by weighing out what is the price for him that someone is willing to pay right now, which means, is my extending him costing me 3 first-round picks and a young player that I really like? Or is it more like the Fred VanVleet offer plus a little bit of Grayson Allen and a second-round pick? You see what I mean? If it's Grayson Allen and a second-round pick, or in this case, Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and a second-round pick that's being offered because teams are so worried that he's going to leave, well, then maybe I don't have to do this. Maybe I do re-sign him and I take, because either case, I mean, it's not like Kevin Huerter and Harrison Barnes can't fall off a cliff, right? I mean, either way, I'm taking a chance on somebody. Might as well take a chance on a better player that I know, right? But am I declining Jarris Walker, Kobe Buffkin, Onyeka Okongwu type deals? Like, do you see what I mean? And number 7, the biggest predictor, in my opinion, of whether a player will succeed or whether they will fail after they sign the big contract. Go through the history of the worst contracts in NBA history. Unless we're talking about like crazy injury stories, like Brandon Roy or something like that. In almost all cases, you're talking about a player that didn't love the game very much. I'm glad that I put this part later in the live because I feel like this is the part that's most controversial. I think a lot of people are obsessed with the game, not obsessed with training, not obsessed with getting in the gym, but actually the game. They live basketball, breathe basketball, talk basketball. They love basketball. They watch basketball every day. Their whole lives are basketball. I'm not saying you have to be that obsessed necessarily, but Kobe Bryant loved basketball. There's no doubt in my mind that when Kobe was at a retreat with his family, that all he was doing was thinking about basketball and talking about basketball and watching basketball. A particular example of this is how much of the league do you actually understand? How much of league history do you understand? If I had a media pass, I would ask Pascal Siakam, who is Artist Gilmore? Who is Artist Gilmore? I would ask him, who's George Gervin? I would ask him, who's Dale Davis? Who's Brian Grant? Who's Rick Smits? How many players in the league currently can you name whose name begins with A? And I would watch him fumble on a microphone. Now, you might say that's irrelevant. How can it be irrelevant? Imagine asking yourself, you play in the NBA. You're telling me you're in scouting meetings. You're playing against these players. Bro, you don't know the names of the other teams, the players, their coaches. You don't know. Ask him who's coaching. Like, honestly, ask him who's coaching the Hornets right now. Just ask him and watch his mind evaporate. What I'm saying is, when you're obsessed with something, it's obvious. I don't need to tell people I'm obsessed with basketball. I talk about basketball all the time. I didn't need to convince my teammates when I was growing up that I was obsessed with basketball. I played basketball in the snow. I built a spot on the court when it would snow, and I would shovel it, and I would play basketball at 2 a.m. I've been obsessed with basketball my whole life, which means that when someone is not obsessed with basketball, it sticks out to me really badly. I don't think Pascal Siakam is obsessed with basketball. I'll give you 2 examples. Number one, I'll tell you, Amen Thompson and Asar Thompson were asked to name players like whose names begin with A, and I believe it was like NBA history. Yo, these guys went on and on and on. I think they beat each one like 26 or 27 deep. It was crazy the names they were bringing up, man. I was like, holy, like these dudes, they studied this back and they had it. It wasn't like, let me Google this real quick. They had it. It was in the back of their hand. I watched Pascal Siakam 30 games of the last season be genuinely surprised. It was like 40 games, almost 40 games into last season. Just check whenever the hell they played the Sacramento Kings. I can't remember exactly. But the Sacramento Kings were a story in the NBA. They're a resurgence. They're a completely dilapidated franchise that's finally having a good season. And he was asked about playing them, and he said, are they good? And it wasn't tongue-in-cheek. It wasn't like one of those Angola, what's Angola? I don't know who Angola is, but, Angola's in trouble from Charles Barkley. No, he was genuinely surprised that the Sacramento Kings were good. And I was like, this dude does not fucking watch basketball. The Sacramento Kings, like the Beam, was like the story of the freaking season, man. It was like one of the 5 biggest stories of the season. You could not have opened ESPN or even turned on any game without being some sort of mention of of Sacramento being good. How do you not know that? I'm genuinely, forget naming, what college Harrison Barnes went to or what college even Steph Curry went to. I bet you he doesn't know the answer to those 2 questions. But I just want to know how a player plays in the NBA, is getting ready to play a team and not know that team is good. And his only comment about it was, oh, well, Rico is there. Maybe that's why they're good. Well, Rico actually left. Maybe that's why they're good. My concept actually on this was that was such a huge tell that you don't follow the league that you are currently a member of. That everything about Siakam that you've seen, like when he talks to or about players, it's not extended. Is it possible, like, for an all NBA guy to be like tight? Like, why is he not close to any other NBA stars? I mean, there's a lot has been made of Giannis not being super close to NBA stars, but he's still close to those guys. He doesn't train with them. He's still close to them. Why does it feel like Pascal Siakam is not in that fraternity? Why does it feel like he doesn't have a relationship with these other top players? Does that make sense? Like, you understand what I'm saying? Why does it feel like there is no real relationship? Like, there's never been an extended conversation between him and Kevin Durant. And how difficult has it been for you as a franchise to draw in interest from a player like Kevin Durant, DeJounte Murray, whatever, when your top player has no real relationship with guys other than the guys he's directly played with. I'll tell you this much. Grant Williams, a certified role player, has a better relationship right now with LeBron James than Pascal Siakam. He's extended his relationship with Draymond Green. Congratulations, because he was on his podcast and whatever. But other than directly, how have you benefited me, whatever, what is his relationship like with players outside of maybe Joel Embiid or whatever? Like we're talking a league full of stars. You ever seen Bradley Beal and Pascal Siakam shake hands because, hey, I'm one of the top players in the NBA. Who are you? You get what I'm saying. Think about what I'm saying. If you're obsessed with the game, if you're obsessed with the NBA, you not only know 40 games in the last season, the Sacramento Kings are really good. You also probably know all of these guys. You probably have their digits. How could a top Vince knew other stars, bro? Vince knew Kobe. Vince, they talked. Vince knew, obviously, Tracy because they're related. Vince knew Sean Marion. Vince knew all these guys. Chris Bosh knew all these guys. You think it's all Team USA. It's not. You think it's all AAU? Maybe. But Luka knows all these guys too. Come on, it's not just all AAU and international. He has relationships. He's taken the time. So the question then becomes, if you want your franchise player to not have extended relationships with other top players in the NBA, how difficult does that make for recruiting? But also, do you want your franchise player to be a guy who's obsessed with basketball? Because what impact does that have on your locker room? And I think that really, does he love the game part? And all of these questions ultimately come back to, if you bring him back long term, I want to understand what his presence is in your locker room. I want to understand what ideas young players pick up, because clearly DeMar DeRozan became a guiding light of work ethic for a lot of young players. Look at the players who came up under DeMar. They're all thriving, man. They're all thriving. Jakob, Pascal, these guys didn't fail. Norman Powell, these guys did not fail, bro. They're great. Jonas Valanciunas. Look at all the young players who come up with that guy. They're thriving across the league. It's just it's like a bevy of starters. Like yesterday, we were talking about Norman Powell as one of the best shooters in the NBA for the last 5 years. Where did he get that from? All the work ethic shit that Pascal and Norm and Fred, I believe if any of these players were on the same trajectory when they got to the Raptors, they wouldn't have been picked so late. Clearly, DeMar DeRozan had a massive impact on these guys. So I want to know, what impact does Pascal Siakam have on these young players? Does he make them more cagey? Is there something that he's going to say in practice or at a team dinner that's going to make them more likely to mistrust your management or mistrust the team or bet on themselves or whatever? I think that this entire conversation goes very, very close into conspiracy territory and he said, she said, and hearsay. So I won't extend it further. What I will say is that based on the questions, based on the answers to these 7 questions that the Raptors must ask themselves, they must decide what to do with Pascal Siakam sooner rather than later, because I believe that kicking this can down to the deadline and then worse to the offseason will backfire. I believe it will backfire in a major way, and I believe that there is no happy outcome if you do extend this out, because I think that Pascal Siakam has a lot in common with every single player, well, almost every single player that I've seen fall off. And that's how I feel. And I think that if you do decide that he will not be, an asset that will hold value once you add that 5th year to the docket, because see, the years that you signed the contract to and his age run concurrently. Does that make sense? So once you sign him at the age of 30 to a 5-year deal, everyone knows that 5th year when he's 35 is a $60 million contract. We had trepidations, by the way, about paying Damian Lillard $60 million when he was 35. Why would anyone trade for Dame? Look at how much you have to pay him when he's 35. That's what people were saying, 35, 36, whatever. Pascal Siakam does not hold a candle to the profile, marketability, value of a Damian Lillard. Allegedly, according to Jake Fisher on that space, he doesn't even hold a candle to the value of Drew Holiday. You must think very hard as a fan base or as a franchise when you extend guys to mammoth deals when they're not household names that everybody seems to really value. Because when value falls off, you need to find a taker I mean, please understand, I come from the hedge fund world. We talk stocks and value and floors all the time because you need to understand where your support is. I'm trying to approach this purely from a data-driven marketing and finance perspective. You need to understand for a particular stock, where is the floor? When I buy a stock, when Pascal Siakam is a 5-year bond or whatever you want to call it, he's like a locked investment of 5 years. You need to understand what the market is, where the floor is, where the ceiling is for that investment. If you buy shares of company X at $80, right? And you understand there is a consensus that because historically how the stock has performed, there is a strong support at $76, then you have an out at 76 should you choose to out at 76. Nobody wants to buy a stock at $80 where support is at $12. You understand? Support signals are important. I think the Raptors are exceedingly is the wrong word, an extremely I think the Raptors are a very smart organization. They've moved off of Kyle right before the decline. They moved off of Marc Gasol right before the decline. They moved off of Serge Ibaka, Danny Green, all of which, granted, you could say they were serviceable for the year after they signed the contract, but they have not shown a willingness as a front office over the last 10 years to sign guys into a predictable decline window. And I believe that they know enough at this point to build a profile of Pascal Siakam as a guy who is 50-50 on the decline window. And I don't think that you sign a guy to $250 million through the prime of what you think is a superstar in Scotty Barnes, thus handicapping your ability to make any sort of moves. If there's anything I know about the Raptors front office, it is this. They honor their word, number one. Number two, they are very flexibility conscious. They care about flexibility. All these player options, team options, shorter deals, etc. They're all a means of creating the maximum flexibility. To sign Otto to a 2-year deal, Schroeder to a 2-year deal. Like, again, because you eat 1 year and then the next year becomes you need to make long-term investments in players you understand. They had no problem taking on 4 years of RJ Barrett. Why? Because they understand his basketball motivations. They know him and they trust him. And they'll have no problem signing Scotty Barnes to a 5-year extension when he's eligible. If he signs 5 years, man, if they could get Scotty Barnes on a 12-year extension, if that was legal, they would sign him to a 12-year extension. That's probably how much they trust that he won't decline. And that's the point. He loves the game. He has all the hallmarks of players who don't decline. Reggie Miller. Let me think about players who love the game and ask yourself, do they remind you of Pascal Siakam? Kevin Garnett. Does he remind you of Pascal Siakam? Dirk Nowitzki. Does he remind you of Pascal Siakam? Tim Duncan. Kobe Bryant. Michael Jordan. Chauncey Billups. You think of like players that I really know love the game. Rasheed Wallace. Loves the game, man. Obsessed with the game. Junkie. Basketball junkie. Knows everything about anything. He could probably recite the entire Detroit Pistons roster for you right now. He could probably recite to you a lot of shit, man. Draymond Green. Loves the game. Steph. Loves the game. Around it his whole life. He'll always be around it. LeBron. Kevin Love. Yeah, sure. DeMar. Holy shit, DeMar loves the game. Kawhi. People don't realize that because he's a little bit cagey, but he's obsessed with the game, man. Obsessed. You do not play a basketball game after your father is shot if you don't love the game, bro. He loves the game. You don't play through the pain that he played through last year if you don't love the game. He loves the game. There are some guys who love the game. There are some guys who love the lifestyle. You need to decide who's who. And let me tell you something. I left this for the 130 mark. It would shock you if you ever heard the true stories of how many NBA players don't really like basketball. They don't talk about basketball. I knew an NBA player. I remember, I don't know him directly, but I knew someone who was very connected to him who said he had a rule that when he left the gym, no one was allowed to ask him a basketball question, not his family, not his kids. No basketball in their house. No one allowed to watch basketball. No one allowed to think about basketball. This guy made I want to say $50 million in his career playing basketball. He didn't give a shit about basketball. Basketball is a vehicle to something else. It was a vehicle to financial security. You think every doctor loves being a doctor? You think every veterinarian loves animals? Why do you think that basketball is this one thing where only the people who are great at it, who love it, honestly and purely, like they all pass through Heaven's Gate to get there? No, man. There are some people who were just really freaking naturally talented at basketball. And someone said, do you want to make $100 million? Put in some hard work for 5 years. And I think you need to identify those people, because once you remove the financial incentive long-term for those people, and you've never seen Pascal Siakam without a financial incentive, ever. You've never seen it. But if you sign him to a 5-year extension, you will see it for the first time. You will see what the limits of professionalism are with him, how he becomes. Pascal Siakam has had numerous times where he has basically mailed it in on defense. I don't think players who care about winning just mail it in on defense for weeks on end. It's worth noting. Terrence Ross is a great example of someone that I don't really feel loved basketball. That's a good thing. Reggie saying, I think Pascal loves the game of soccer. Yes, I think he loves soccer too. I think the fact that this guy wanted to be a priest and probably wanted to be a soccer player growing up, and the fact that he found an avenue in basketball. You know, one of the things that really scared me off of Jalen Suggs, I'll tell you, like, this is not exclusive to Pascal Siakam. I listen to everybody when they talk about basketball, and I look for cues and things that kind of throw me off. Jalen Suggs said that for the 6 months or 5 months that the football season was on, he would absolutely lock away the basketball and wouldn't touch it for 5 months. And that scared me. And that's when I knew that I did not want Jalen Suggs to be a Raptor. Not that I needed any nudging. I was very high on Scotty, but like that kind of comment threw me off. That this guy he can't love the game of basketball if you can just put it away for 5 months. I don't know anyone who can do that. Like, you're obsessed with competition. You're obsessed with playing and being athletic and competing. That's one thing. But to be obsessed with the game on like an obsessive level, like Shaq's obsessed with the game, I think. Actually, he might be obsessed with the limelight. Let me think of a player who's obsessed with the game. Bill Russell. Bill Russell was probably the most obsessed basketball player. Michael Jordan. How did I not name Michael Jordan? Obsessed with the game. I just think that this game obsession thing is a really good clue in to which guys are going to fall off, because, I've seen too many Gilbert Arenas stories in my life, man. I've seen too many guys who just took the bag and walked away into the limelight. And there are a lot of players who, in this exact age window of 29 to 30, sign their final big deal, and then the mask's off, and then you see how much they actually care about getting better. I'm not suggesting that he would come out and basically, fail drug tests and fall off so much, but I am saying that if you're the Raptors, you know him better than anybody, and if you're a fan, you should know that the team that knows him better than anybody is a team that has to date declined to offer him a 5-year extension. Think about it. Okay. Okay. Thank everyone in this community for reaching out about my dog. Yesterday, I mentioned that my dog was falling over a lot. To those of you who don't know, this is my dog. And yeah, that's when he was 3 years old or 2 years old. No, he was 3 years old in that picture. He's now 14. So I spent a little bit of time today with him getting tests at the vet. Vets are very expensive. Naturally, like, I'm very, very blessed that this channel has done well enough over the last, year, and that I'm doing okay enough to be able to afford this. But my heart really goes out to people who have to, potentially, like, I've known people who've had to go into massive, massive, massive amounts of debt to take care of their pets. It sucks. But you got to do what you got to do. Anyways, okay. Take care, guys. Have a good one. And, once this video goes live, let me know what you thought of this idea. Because to the specific point of this video, to just close the loop, because the Zeigarnik effect is real. Pascal Siakam holds the Raptors by their balls, because by continuously saying that he will not, and like he won't resign, he's absolutely diminishing his value and forcing the Raptors to be one of the teams that will negotiate or be leveraged against. Because if he allows the Raptors to trade him to, say, Indiana or Dallas or whatever, two things happen. Number one, the Raptors fall out of contention for his services next offseason, which diminishes his negotiating power with that team and subsequently all other teams. Number two, a team that he does not know and does not trust necessarily in Indiana or whatever is going to be determining the floor on his next salary. Because naturally, think about it from his perspective, he has to secure the largest bag with this next deal. The largest bag he can sign is with the team that holds his rights. The team that holds his rights has the offer to push up his offer to 5 years max money, 250. That number in his mind is 250. The team that will offer him 250 will be the team that has him next offseason. Come back to me when that happens. So whoever that team is, and that team can only be the team that holds his bird rights. So once he gets the bag, then whatever, trade him wherever. I don't think that matters at that point. But I really do question the basketball motivations of a 30-year-old who wants to be part of a rebuild or a retool when he's clearly been shown by management over and over again that he is not part of their future plans. I think you're right to be very suspicious of the situation, because the situation doesn't make sense until you really, really think about it. Yeah. Anyways, take care, guys. See ya.